Hello again, friends. I've been trying to grow my tiny channel, and I've been looking around YouTube to see what is popular. I think maybe I should start reading Reddit stories. I mean, those are all fairy tales, right? Well, I'll think about it. Meanwhile, on to more classic types of tales. And this next tale is classic. Seriously classic. This is a Norwegian tale, although versions of it can be found all over the world, similar to Cinderella. In fact, it is believed that the earliest form of this story may be Egyptian, in a story called The Tale of the Doomed Prince, and dates as far back as 330 AD, or for you younger folks, 330 CE. I hope, since it has lasted for so long, that this is a good story, but I have learned to temper my expectations. So together, let us discover The Princess on the Glass Hill. This was a request, but I forgot to write down who requested it. My sincerest apologies, but to whoever requested it, here it is. Once upon a time, there was a man who had a meadow which lay high up on a hillside, and in the meadow was a barn which he had built to keep his hay in. Now, I must tell you, there hadn't been much in the barn for the last year or two, for every St. John's night. When is St. John's night? Google? Traditional jumping through burning fires in which aromatic herbs were burnt to purify and protect against evil and misfortune, or releasing wreaths with flaming candles into the river by young girls, which, in turn, constituted the divination of marriage, are just some of the most famous rituals of this night. Oh, that sounds fun. Who is St. John? Google? Why is St. John's Day celebrated? It was created by the Catholic Church to honor the birth of the forerunner of Jesus Christ, John the Baptist. The day reminds the Christian world of an iconic prophet who, in the Gospel of Luke, is said to be born 6 months before the birth of Jesus Christ. You know, we learn so many things on this channel together. It's kind of nice. Back to the story. When the grass stood greenest and deepest, the meadow was eaten down to the very ground the next morning, just as if a whole drove of sheep had been there feeding on it overnight. This happened once, and it happened twice. So at last the man grew weary of losing his crop of hay, and said to his sons, for he had 3 of them, and the youngest was nicknamed Boots, of course. Why, of course. You know, we named our 3rd son Bob. Oh, how I love Count Bob. Also, does it matter at all what the other brothers' names are? I mean, will we ever even meet them again? That now one of them must go and sleep in the barn in the outlying field when St. John's night came, for it was too good a joke that his grass should be eaten, root and blade, this year as it had been the last 2 years. So whichever of them went must keep a sharp lookout. That was what their father said. When the eldest son was ready to go and watch the meadow, trust him for looking after the grass. It shouldn't be his fault if man or beast or the fiend himself got a blade of grass. So when evening came, he set off to the barn and lay down to sleep. You're supposed to be watching. There will be no grass in the morning. But a little on in the night came such a clatter and such an earthquake that the walls and roof shook and groaned and creaked. Then up jumped the lad and took to his heels as fast as ever he could. Nor dared he once look round till he reached home. And as for the hay, why, it was eaten up this year, just as it had been twice before. Well done, oldest son. No wonder you don't have a name. The next St. John's night, the man said again, it would never do to lose all the grass in the outlying field year after year in this way. So one of his sons must trudge off to watch it, and watch it well. And wow, that's the last we ever hear of the father. Goodbye, Dad. It was nice to know you. When the oldest son was ready to try his luck, so he set off, and lay down to sleep in the barn as his brother had done before him. They're amazing watchers. But as the night wore on, there came a rumbling and quaking of the earth, worse even than the one on the last St. John's night. And when the lad heard it, he got frightened, and took to his heels as though he were running a race. Well, now I know why we only bothered to name Boots. Next year, the turn came to Boots. But when he made ready to go, the other two began to laugh and make a game of him, saying, "You're just the man to watch the hay, that you are. You who have done nothing all your life but sit in the ashes and toast yourself by the fire." But Boots did not care a pin for their chattering, and stumped away as evening grew on. Up the hillside to the outlying field, there he went inside the barn and lay down. But in an hour's time the barn began to groan and creak so that it was dreadful to hear. "Well," said Boots to himself, "if it isn't worse than this, I can stand it well enough." A little while after came another creak and an earthquake, so that the litter of the barn flew about the lad's ears. "Oh," said Boots to himself, "if it isn't worse than this, I dare say I can stand it out." But just then came a third rumbling and a third earthquake, so that the lad thought the walls and roof were coming down on his head. But it passed off, and all was still as death about him. "It'll come again, I'll be bound," thought Boots. But no, it didn't come again. Still it was, and still it stayed. But after he had lain a little while, he heard a noise, as if a horse were standing just outside the barn door and cropping the grass. He stole to the door and peeped through a chink, and there stood a horse feeding away. So big and fat and grand a horse Boots had never set eyes on. By his side on the grass lay a saddle and bridle and a full set of armor for a knight, all of brass, so bright that the light gleamed from it. "Ho, ho," thought the lad, "it's you, is it, that eats up our hay? I'll soon put a spoke in your wheel, just to see if I don't." Put a spoke in... what? You know that... I don't think I've ever heard that before. Google? The expression is recorded from the late 16th century in form, "I will set a spoke to your cog." The current form became established in the early 17th century. Spoke here is probably a mistranslation of Dutch spak, meaning bar or stave. Hey, maybe I can start saying my tiny channel is educational. So he lost no time, but took the steel out of his tinderbox and threw it over the horse. Then it had no power to stir from the spot and became tame, so the lad could do what he liked with it. Wait, what? Why? What? Why would putting steel over a horse? What? Oh, that makes no sense at all. So he got back and rode off with it to a place which no one knew of, and there he put up the horse. When he got home, his brothers laughed and asked how he had fared. "You didn't lie long in the barn, even if you had the heart to go so far as the field." "Well," said Boots, "all I can say is, I lay in the barn till the sun rose, and neither saw nor heard anything. I can't think what there was in the barn to make you both so afraid." "A pretty story," said his brothers, "but we'll soon see how you have watched the meadow." So they set off, but when they reached it, there stood the grass as deep and thick as it had been overnight. Well, the next St. John's Eve, it was the same story over again. Neither of the elder brothers dared to go out to the outlying field to watch the crop, but Boots, he had the heart to go. And everything happened just as it had happened the year before. First, a clatter and an earthquake, then a greater clatter and another earthquake, and so on a third time. Only this year the earthquake were far worse than the year before. Then all at once everything was still as death, and the lad heard how something was cropping on the grass outside the barn door. So he stole to the door, and he peeped through a chink, and what do you think he saw? Why, another horse standing right up against the wall, and chewing and champing with might and main. It was far finer and fatter than that which came the year before, and it had a saddle on its back, and a bridle on its neck, and a full suit of mail for a knight lay by its side, all of silver, and as grand as you would wish to see. "Ho, ho," said Boots to himself, "it's you that gobbles up our hay, isn't it? I'll soon put a spoke in your wheel." But what about the last horse? Has it been a different horse every year? Will the next suit of armor be gold? Because that armor would be shiny, but useless. And with that, he took the steel out of his tinderbox and threw it over the horse's crest, which stood as still as a lamb. Why? Someone explain that to me in the comments. Well, the lad rode this horse too, to the hiding place where he kept the other one, and after that he went home. "I suppose you'll tell us," said one of his brothers, "there's a fine crop this year too, up in the hay field." "Well, so there is," said Boots, and off ran the others to see. And there stood the grass thick and deep, as it was the year before. But they didn't give Boots softer words for all that. Do you know this is beginning to sound repetitive? Now when the third St. John's Eve came, yep, this is repetitive. Look, it's the same thing. Brothers are scared, big scary noises, and a horse nicer than the other two. You know, I bet this one looked like the one from that Bugs Bunny cartoon where he sings opera. He does the weird flint steel thing, and the horse becomes tame, and off he rides with it to the other two at the hiding place where, boy, I hope he's been feeding them. Anyway, when he got home, his brothers made game of him, as they had done before, saying they could see he had watched the grass well, for he looked all the world as if he were walking in his sleep, and many other spiteful things they said. But Boots gave no heed to them, only asking them to go and see for themselves. And when they went, there stood the grass as fine and deep this time as it had been twice before. Now you must know that the king of the country where Boots lived had a daughter, whom he would only give to the man who could ride up over a glass hill. For there was a high, high hill, all of glass, as smooth and slippery as ice, close by the king's palace. I wonder if it's old Rink-Rank's glass mountain. Ah, it's a small fantasy world. Upon the tip-top of the hill the king's daughter was to sit, with 3 golden apples in her lap, and the man who could ride up and carry off the 3 golden apples was to have half the kingdom and the princess to wife. Does the princess get a vote? Because she should really get a vote. This the king had stuck up on all the church doors in his realm, and had given it out in many other kingdoms besides. Now, this princess was so lovely that all who set eyes on her felt head over ears and... Head over ears? Head, really? Oh, head and ears. That doesn't make any more sense. This is a very weird story. Well, anyway, in love with her, whether they would or no. So, I needn't tell you how all the princes and knights who heard of her were eager to win her to wife, and half the kingdom besides. And how they came riding from all parts of the world on high prancing horses and clad in the grandest clothes, for there wasn't one of them who hadn't made up his mind that he, and he alone, was to win the princess. So, I see you're a good man and a strong provider, and my daughter likes you, but can you ride a horse up a hill of glass? Fairy tale kings have really bad value systems. So, when the day of the trial came, which the king had fixed, there was such a crowd of princes and knights under the glass hill that it made one's head whirl to look at them, and everyone in the country who could even crawl along was off to the hill, for they were all eager to see the man who was to win the princess, and also there was no other form of entertainment. So the 2 elder brothers set off with the rest, but as for Boots, they said outright he couldn't go with them, for if they were to be seen with such a dirty changeling, all begrimed with smut from cleaning their shoes and shifting cinders in the dust hole, they said folk would make game of them. Aw, poor cinder fella, always left alone when there's a ball. Very well, said Boots, it's all one to me. I can go alone and stand or fall by myself. Now, when the 2 brothers came to the hill of glass, the knights and princes were all hard at it, riding their horses till they were all in a foam, but it was no good. By my troth. Ooh, I know that one. Troth is an ancient word for truth. Just a fun fact. For as soon as ever the horses set foot on the glass hill, down they slipped, and there wasn't one who could get a yard or 2 up. And no wonder, for the hill was as smooth as a sheet of glass. Well, that would make sense because it's, a glass hill. It's kind of right there in the description. And as steep as a house wall. But all were eager to have the princess and half the kingdom. So they rode and slipped and rode, and still it was the same story over again. At last all their horses were so weary that they could scarce lift a leg, and in such a sweat that the lather dripped from them, and so the knights had to give up trying any more. The king was just thinking that he would proclaim a new trial for the next day to see if they would have better luck, when all at once a knight came riding up so brave on a steed that no one had ever seen the like of in his born days. And the knight had mail of brass, and the horse a brass bit in his mouth, so bright that the sunbeams shone from it. Then all the others called out to him he might just as well spare himself the trouble of riding at the hill, for it would lead to no good. But he gave no heed to them, and put his horse at the hill, and went up it like nothing for a good way, about a third of the height. And when he had got so far, he turned his horse round and rode down again. So lovely a knight the princess thought she had never yet seen. And while he was riding, she sat and thought to herself, would to heaven he might only come up and down the other side. And when she saw him turning back, she threw down one of the golden apples after him, and it rolled down into his shoe. Hey, that's cheating. But when he got to the bottom of the hill, he rode off so fast that no one could tell what had become of him. That evening all the knights and princes were to go before the king, that he who had ridden so far up the hill might show the apple which the princess had thrown. But there was no one who had anything to show. One after the other they all came, but not a man of them could show the apple. At even, the brothers of Boots came home too, and had such a long story to tell about the riding up the hill. First of all, they said, there was not one of the whole lot who could get so much as a stride up, but at last came one who had a suit of brass mail, and a brass bridle and saddle. Wait, the saddle was made of brass? That sounds terribly uncomfortable. All so bright that the sun shone from them a mile off. He was a chap to ride just. He rode a third of the way up the hill, and he could easily have ridden the whole way up if he chose. But he turned round and rode down, thinking maybe that was good enough for once. Oh, I should have liked to have seen him, that I should, said Boots, who sat by the fireside and stuck his feet into the cinders as was his wont. You know, all this story is missing is a Hitchcockian tree of dead mother. Oh, said his brothers, you would you? You look fit to keep company with such high lords, nasty beast that you are, sitting there among the ashes. Next day, the brothers were all for setting off again, and Boots begged them, this time too, to let him go with them and see the riding, but no, they wouldn't have him at any price. He was too ugly and nasty, they said. And you don't even know how to dance or have a dress or... sorry. Wrong story. Well, said Boots, if I go at all, I must go by myself. I'm not afraid. So when the brothers got to the hill of glass, all the princes and knights began to ride again, and you may fancy they had taken care to shoe their horses sharp. But it was no good. They rode and slipped and rode, just as they had done the day before, and there was not one who could get so far as a yard up the hill. And when they had worn all their horses so they could not stir a leg, they were all forced to give up as a bad job. So the king thought he might as well proclaim that the riding should take place the day after for the last time, just to give them one more chance. But all at once it came across his mind that he might as well wait a little longer to see if the knight in brass mail would come this day too. Well, they saw nothing of him, but all at once came one riding on a steed far, far braver and finer than that one on which the knight in brass had ridden. And he had silver mail and a silver saddle and bridle. Really? Riding metal saddles are just a terrible idea. All so bright that the sunbeams gleamed and glanced from them far away. Then the others shouted out to him again, saying he might as well hold hard and not try to ride up the hill, for all his trouble would be thrown away. But the knight paid no heed to them, and rode straight at the hill, and right up it, till he had gone 2/3 of the way, and then he wheeled his horse round and rode down again. To tell the truth, the princess liked him still better than the knight in brass, and she sat and wished he might only be able to come right up to the top and down the other side. But when she saw him turning back, she threw the second apple after him, and it rolled down and fell into his shoe. But as soon as ever he had come down from the hill of glass, he rode off so fast that no one could see what became of him. At even, when all were to go in before the king and the princess, that he who had the golden apple might show it, in they went, one after the other. But there was no one who had any apple to show, and the two brothers, as they had done on the former day, went home and told how things had gone, and how all had ridden at the hill, and none got up. But last of all, they said, came one in a silver suit, and his horse had a silver saddle and a silver bridle. He was just a chap to ride, and he got 2/3 up the hill, and then turned back. He was a fine fellow, and no mistake, and the princess threw the second gold apple to him. "Oh," said Boots, "I should have liked to see him too, that I should," he said, pushing a silver boot under his table. Sorry, spoilers. "A pretty story," they said. "Perhaps you think his coat of mail was so bright as the ashes you are always poking about and sifting, you nasty, dirty beast." The third day everything happened as it had happened the 2 days before. Boots begged to go and see the sight, but the two wouldn't hear of his going with them. "Oh, I hope nobody puts pitch on the mountain." When they got to the hill, there was no one who could get so much as a yard up it, and now all waited for the knight in silver mail, but they neither saw nor heard of him. At last came one riding on a steed so brave that no one had ever seen his match, and the knight had a suit of golden mail, and a golden saddle and bridle. See, I told you the last bit of armor would be gold. So wondrous bright that the sunbeams gleamed from them a mile off. The other knights and princes could not find time to call out to him not to try his luck, for they were amazed to see how grand he was. So he rode right at the hill and tore up it like nothing, so that the princess hadn't even time to wish that he might get up the whole way. And as soon as ever he reached the top, he took the third golden apple from the princess's lap, and then turned his horse and rode down again. And as soon as he got down, he rode off at full speed and was out of sight in no time. Now when the brothers got home at even, you may fancy what long stories they told, how the riding had gone off that day, and amongst other things, that they had a deal to say about the knight in golden mail. He was just the chap to ride, they said. So grand a knight isn't to be found in the wide world. "Oh," said Boots, "I should like to have seen him, that I should." "Ah," said his brothers, "his mail shone a deal brighter than the glowing coals which you are always poking and digging at, nasty, dirty beast that you are." I don't like the brothers. Next day, the knights and princes were to pass before the king and the princess. It was too late to do so the night before, I suppose, that he who had the gold apple might bring it forth. But one came after another. First the princes and then the knights, and still no one could show the gold apple. "Well," said the king, "someone must have it, for it was something we all saw with our own eyes, how a man came and rode up and bore it off." "How do you know it was a man? He was in armor." So he commanded that every man who was in the kingdom should come up to the palace and see if they could show the apple. Well, they all came, one after another, but no one had the apple. And after a long time, the two brothers of Boots came. They were the last of all, so the king asked them if there was no one else in the kingdom who hadn't come. "Oh, yes," they said, "we have a brother, but he never carried off the golden apple. He hasn't stirred out of his dust hole any of the 3 days." "Never mind that," said the king. "He may as well come up to the palace like the rest." So Boots had to go to the palace. "How now," said the king, "have you got the golden apple? Speak out." "Yes, I have," said Boots. "Here is the first, and here is the second, and here is the third, too." And with that, he pulled all 3 golden apples out of his pocket, and at the same time threw off his sooty rags and stood before them in a gleaming golden mail. Wow, he must have looked really bulky, because mail is not small, and he had rags over them? Okay, wait, I have to picture that. Yeah, that's just stupid. "Yes," said the king, "you shall have my daughter and half my kingdom, for you well deserve both her and it." So they got ready for the wedding, and Boots got the princess to wife, and there was great merrymaking at the bridal feast, you may fancy, for they could all be merry, though they couldn't ride up the hill of glass. And all I can say is, if they haven't left off their merrymaking yet, why they're still at it. That's it? Where are the birds to peck out the brother's eyes? Nothing happens to them at all? How disappointing. No need to do a content warning on this one, I suppose. So, basically, this is an early Cinderella. Now we know. I'm not sure which name is worse, Boots or Cinderella. Well, we come to the end of yet another tale. I do hope you liked it. I personally felt it was missing something. Something that would have caused a content warning, but, still. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like, please press the bell icon so you can be notified when I put out my stories. I now have a Facebook page. I'll put a link in the description right next to the Patreon link. And if you'd like, you can support me on Patreon. I am so happy to have you come back week after week and listen to fairy tales. Thank you all so much. And now, a special thank you for my Patreon supporters.
My dear Patreon supporters, Robinson, Ida, Darren, Teresa, Brick's Journey, Karen, and now William. I would like to thank all 7 of you. 7 supporters. The same as the age of Snow White when the dwarf sold her tiny corpse to a strange prince to be his bride. Still, even though the number 7 will always haunt me, I appreciate you so much. I raise my glass to you.